is a radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear. It's an organization that aims to educate the public about nuclear power. He joins us now from Brattleboro, Vermont. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So these are very low levels of radioactivity. That's what we're being told. Do you have any concerns about it?
Well, certainly so. There's been tremendous releases from Fukushima Daiichi that continue to this day, some 300 tons per day of radioactive water pouring into the ocean. And granted, these may be relatively low levels, but this is artificial hazardous radioactivity. And if it's showing up on the North American coastline, you have to worry about the entire ocean.
We aren't worried as people necessarily about the levels here, but what about for wildlife? You mentioned if it shows up along the entire North American coast or the West Coast, what about the wildlife? What about things along that coast, trees, that kind of thing?
Well, certainly one of the big health hazards that we have to worry about, being on the top of the food chain as we are, is the bioconcentration, the bioaccumulation of this artificial radioactivity in the seafood supply. So that's going to be a pathway of exposure to human beings. And this situation could get a lot worse if Tokyo Electric is allowed to dump some 280 million liters of highly radioactive wastewater into the ocean. And they supposedly will filter some of the radioactive poisons out, but one poison called tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen, is not filterable. And their plan is to dump that intentionally into the ocean.
Have we ever seen anything like this before that we could compare it to?
No, this is unprecedented damage to the ocean. I mean, Chernobyl did have releases into the Dnieper River, which flowed into the Black Sea. But these releases on a daily basis right now are unprecedented directly into the Pacific Ocean.
Do you anticipate that the levels will get higher as we see more of this water make its way towards the west coast of North America?
Well, those 300 tons per day are each and every day, so that's going to be a continuous stream of radioactivity from Fukushima Daiichi into the ocean. But if Tokyo Electric and the central government of Japan get away with this large-scale dumping of the highly radioactive stored water, that would be a major assault on the ocean. It's treating it like it's a radioactive industrial sewer, but it's the origin of life, and it's the home of the seafood supply.
So what should they do with this waste? What can they do with it?
Well, they are storing, as we speak, some 280,000 tons of highly radioactive wastewater. And granted, the storage needs to be secured. It's very shoddily built. But it needs to be stored until, for example, the hazard of the tritium dissipates, which will take some 120 years.
So they can continue to store it, but it sounds like that's not the best alternative either.
They need to do it in a more secure location. Of course, the site is vulnerable to big earthquakes and tsunamis, and the storage is located right on the ocean side.
Wow. All right. Kevin Camps is joining us. He is with a group called Beyond Nuclear. Thanks for joining us, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
We already know that radiation has been detected off of British Columbia's coast, but now for the first time, radioactive isotypes from the Fukushima Daiichi disaster have turned up, and it's been more than 4 years after an earthquake triggered a meltdown at the facility. CTV's Jet Bassi joins us live now from Ucluelet on Vancouver Island with a closer look at the details and the discovery. Jet, what are you learning? What exactly was found?
So far right now, we've noticed the fact that scientists are saying that the Fukushima disaster, those isotopes, those man-made isotopes, C-134, have now arrived onto the shore here in Canada, especially here in Ucluelet. On February 19th, a sample was taken from the Canadian government dock. That sample was taken by Inform, a local volunteer group here, in conjunction with the University of Victoria. It was sent, that sample, to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute in the U.S., where it was discovered that that water sample, that seawater sample, had cesium-134 in the same radiation levels or the same radiation isotopes that are found in Fukushima that was released there into the water in Japan.
All right, so what does this mean for residents? Can they swim in the water? They shouldn't drink the water? What are you learning?
At the moment right now, scientists are saying that, you know what, the water is safe. It will not affect human life or sea life or the oceans ecosystem. So at the moment, the water is safe, but there are some concerns here because tufino and eucalypt are tourist attractions here. So when you hear the words radiation, and the idea of radioactive water, contaminated water being here in this area, there is some fear that installs to someone. So at the moment right now, we're going to be seeing a lot more. The peak will come for radiation in about a few months, and that's when the scientists will do some more testing to determine whether the levels and if they've increased or not.
And what are experts telling you as far as what they have to do to actually clean all of this up, if they can?
The peak will happen in a few months, but they determined the fact that in 2020 it will dissipate. It'll circle out by itself due with the ocean currents, and it will filter back into the ocean, and it'll go away by itself by 2020.
And so how exactly did they come to find all of this? I mean, is this something that they're testing regularly in that area or all along the BC coast, or was it that something looked a little bit strange to a resident? How did they find all this out?
Well, the scientists were actually anticipating this to happen. So what they did was they created a volunteer group in form, and this volunteer group collected samples up and down the coast here. And when they collected samples for the past 4 years, they sent the samples, they tested samples, and what they determined was the fact that yes, the disaster from Fukushima, the radioactivity has arrived here. It was something that they anticipated, but they do anticipate that this, by 2020, should go away by itself in the ocean currents by itself.
CTV's Jet Bassey letting us know about this radioactive isotopes detected off the coast of BC. Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Jet.
Japanese officials are trying to strike a balance between nuclear and renewable energy. Before the Fukushima disaster, nuclear energy provided more than a quarter of the nation's electricity. Right now, all the nation's nuclear plants are offline, but government officials want to bring some of them back. Officials at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry have been consulting experts from a variety of fields. They want to come up with what they think will be an optimal energy mix by the year 2030. They plan to reduce dependency on nuclear power to the lower 20% range. Before the 2011 accident, nuclear power provided 28% of the country's electricity. And the officials say renewable energy will eventually provide more power than nuclear power. Renewable sources currently account for 21%. The officials are aiming for a limited cut in nuclear energy so as to contain greenhouse gas emissions. The ministry will present a draft proposal to Japan's ruling parties by the end of this month.
People from a town near Japan's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant are a step closer to returning home. They've gotten permission to stay overnight in their own houses for the first time in 4 years. Japanese government officials have given people in Naraha the go-ahead. About 7,500 of them have been living in other areas since the nuclear accident. Most of the town is still designated as an evacuation zone, but officials plan to lift the order later this year. Shigeru Yoshida and his wife Nobuko have been living in temporary housing in another part of Fukushima. They brought along food, water, and other daily necessities for their first night at home.
We've finally come this far after 4 years. I don't know what will happen from here on out, but we've taken half a step forward.
Officials say just over 180 out of about 2,700 households have applied for permission to stay overnight. Many people have expressed concerns about radiation. They also want local infrastructure to be rebuilt. Officials say they will hold a series of meetings to explain what the government plans to do, and then they'll set a date for lifting the evacuation order.
Hello YouTubers, it is 7/20/2015. Okay, we're over here on any news. Nuclear, oh god, that word again, expert. We should be very worried about ongoing catastrophe at Fukushima. No shit, Sherlock. Okay, Weepy Willow 2 for you, coming at you, Daily Data News. Complete failure of ice wall. Well, fuck, they still doing with the ice wall? What blithered idiots. Okay, let's start that over. Complete failure of ice wall built to contain extremely radioactive water. Really? Plutonium is flowing into Pacific. Will for many years to come. Strontium in ocean hits record level. Huge increase reported since April. This is published today, July 20th, 2015 at 12:59 a.m. Okay. Let's see what we have here. All right, excerpts from presentation by Arnie Gunderson, Fairwind's chief engineer, July 16, 2015. Are the meltdowns at Fukushima Daiichi over? This catastrophe is not over. We should continue to be very worried. See that? It says very worried. Highlighted. Darkened. Whatever the hell you want to call it. Okay, emphasized. Okay, 3 of the nuclear cores at Fukushima Daiichi are in direct contact with groundwater. Nuclear power designer and engineer never anticipated that possibility. Fukushima Daiichi units number 1, 2, and 3 were destroyed, allowing holes and cracks to form. We know for sure that the Fukushima Daiichi containments are full of holes that allow groundwater to come in direct contact with each nuclear core. Groundwater is still leaking in and leaking out at a rate of at least 300 tons per day. More than 1,500 days have passed. 23,000 tanker truckloads of radioactive water have already leaked into the, oh my gosh, Pacific Ocean. 23,000 tanker truckloads of radioactive water have already leaked into the Pacific Ocean. Worse yet, okay, there is no end in sight. No end, folks. No end in sight. Okay, as Fairwinds anticipated, the ice wall is a complete failure. Cesium, strontium, and plutonium from Fukushima Daiichi will continue to bleed into the ocean for decades because the groundwater flow is unmitigated. Japan's press looks on silently due to the real threat and constraints of the government's Secrecy Act. The true human, financial, and environmental costs of this nuclear power catastrophe are not publicized and discussed. Oh, well, no, it's just pss, 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 pss. Everything's quiet and sneaky and behind a cloak. And, yeah. Okay, maybe that's why they have a dragon, you know. All right, TEPCO reported on July 17 that strontium-90 concentrations in the ocean outside Fukushima units 3 and 4 are at record highs. Levels have spiked around 1,000% in 3 months. As strontium-90 measured between Unit 3 and 4 intake channels, July 17 reported 1,500 becquerels a liter. April 23rd report was 150 becquerels a liter. All right, strontium-90 measures at Unit 4 screen, July 17 report, 1,500 becquerels a liter, and April 23rd report, 120 becquerels. But yet, y'all seen when I do the daggone RAD report, it doesn't show nothing, you know? Everything's gone down, really. Well, we knew that was a fucking lie. According to TEPCO's July 17 report, the total level of all beta ray emitters, which includes strontium-90, was 1,200 becquerels a liter. Yet the levels reported for strontium-90 were 1,500 becquerels a liter. What? Okay, which includes strontium. Okay, somebody double talking here. 1,200 becquerels a liter. Yet levels reported for strontium-90 were okay, 1,500 becquerels a liter. When a similar occurrence happened last year, Asahi reported strontium levels exceeded the all-better readings in some instances, leading the utility to decide they were wrong. TEPCO's corrected data revealed much higher levels. Yeah, hiding it, always hiding it, lying through your teeth. Okay, here's Gunderson's presentation here. Shit. Commercial.
Hi, I'm Arnie Gunderson with Fairwinds Energy Education. Every week we get emails and phone calls asking us questions like, are the meltdowns at Fukushima Daiichi over? Have the problems been solved? Should we still be worried? The answers are no, this catastrophe is not over. No, the problems are not solved. And yes, we should continue to be very worried. Let me tell you why. 3 of the nuclear cores of Fukushima Daiichi are in direct contact with groundwater. Nuclear power designers and engineers never anticipated that possibility. Nuclear reactors never shut down completely. After a uranium atom splits to create its power, the radioactive rubble left behind remains physically hot for 5 years. So when the earthquake and the tsunami destroyed the cooling system at Fukushima, the nuclear fuel pellets that are usually contained and suspended in nuclear fuel rods melted. And they wound up in the bottom of an 8-inch thick nuclear reactor. The steel from that reactor melted too. That's called a melt-through, leaving a hot nuclear core lying on the floor of the 4-foot thick containment. Fukushima Daiichi Units 1 and 2 and 3 were destroyed by the heat and the radiation inside, allowing holes and cracks to form. Did the nuclear fuel melt through the concrete too? We know for sure that the Fukushima Daiichi containments are full of holes that allow groundwater to come in direct contact with each nuclear core. Whether or not the nuclear fuel melted through the containment doesn't matter to the environment or to the people of Fukushima. Unfortunately, this groundwater is still leaking in and leaking out at a rate of at least 300 tons per day. Let's put that number in perspective. This is a picture of a tanker truck. Each tanker truck carries 5,000 gallons of water, which is about 20 tons. For you to have an idea of how much 300 tons of radio water.
Let's say that again.
15 tanker truck. Each tanker truck carries 5,000 gallons of water, which is about 20 tons. For you to have an idea of how much 300 tons of radioactive water is, imagine filling 15 tanker trucks with radioactive contaminated water every day. Now remember that more than 1,500 days have passed since the disastrous triple meltdown at Fukushima Daiichi, and multiply that by the 15 truckloads each day. This is the equivalent of about 23,000 tanker truckloads of radioactive water that have already leaked into the Pacific Ocean. Worse yet, there's no end in sight. During the first month following Fukushima catastrophe, Fairwind said it would be imperative that Tokyo Electric stop the inflow of water to the site in order to prevent serious groundwater contamination. Think of an overflowing bathtub. During the past 4 years, instead of stopping the inflow of water to the site, TEPCO just keeps adding more bathtubs to collect the overflowing water. The real solution is to turn off the tap, stop the groundwater flow. As Fairwinds anticipated, the ice wall Tokyo Electric proposed is a complete failure. Groundwater experts from around the world have contacted Fairwinds many times to discuss their proven methods and technologies that would stop the inflow of water into Fukushima Daiichi site. But TEPCO and the Japanese government have continued to ignore these experts in these new technologies. There are ways to stop the groundwater. TEPCO is just not listening. Viewers keep asking Fairwinds about the difference between the meltdown at Chernobyl in the Ukraine and the triple meltdown at Fukushima Daiichi in Japan. The major difference right now is that the nuclear core at Chernobyl never came in contact with groundwater. Here's a picture of the core taken in 1987, 1 year after the Chernobyl disaster. It's called the elephant's foot. Today, almost 30 years later, if people stood in a room with the elephant's foot melted core, everyone would die in 8 minutes.
Jeez.
Unlike Chernobyl, no one knows where the 3 melted cores are at Fukushima Daiichi. What is known is that the 3 cores are in direct contact with groundwater. As the groundwater comes down the hillside and infiltrates the site, it becomes contaminated with radioactivity. Then that radioactive water continues its movement and flows out of the reactors into the surrounding area, severely contaminating the ground and other water it touches as it continues toward the ocean. The ongoing migration of extremely radioactive water at Fukushima is making the cleanup 100 times more complicated and 100 times more expensive than Chernobyl. To date, the cleanup of Chernobyl site has cost about $3 billion, without adding for the cost of the ongoing exclusion zone wildfires that are spewing massive amounts of radioactivity back into the atmosphere.
If TEPCO doesn't want to do the right thing, why in the hell doesn't the rest of the world get on board and do something about it?
To date, Fukushima Daiichi not only has released the equivalent of 23,000 truckloads of radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean.
It's more than that, folks.
But highly radioactive as well. The expanding radioactive contamination will necessitate at least 250,000 truckloads of radioactive dirt to be removed. What place on Earth would willingly take the waste? And how would it ever be contained for 250,000 years? The press and scientists need to ask, why is the Ukrainian government waiting at least 100 years to attempt to decommission Chernobyl, while the Japanese government and TEPCO claim that Fukushima Daiichi will be decommissioned and dismantled during the next 30 years? Quite honestly, the answer has nothing to do with science and everything to do with politics and money.
Yeah, and lying.
To understand Fukushima Daiichi,
Politics is
the press
lying.
needs to follow the money. Before the Fukushima Daiichi triple meltdown, Japan's nuclear industry had 54 operating nuclear reactors. All are presently shut down. However, every nuclear reactor in Japan that has been shut down for the last 4 years has maintained their full staff of engineers, operators, etc., even though they produced no power during that time. Why? Where did the money come from to pay the approximately 700 employees at each of the shut down 50 nuclear reactors? The answer is that Japan's energy corporations borrowed tens of billions of dollars from Japan's banks in order to pay the nuclear power plant staffing during the last 4 years. The only way for the banks to be compensated for this tremendous cash outlay is if those shut down nuclear plants are restarted. My contacts in Japan continue to tell me that the banks are putting enormous pressure on Japan's parliament to start up Japan's nuclear reactors so the banks can get paid back for their investment.
Yeah.
Polls show that the vast majority of Japanese people are against restarting any nuclear reactors in Japan. In an effort to convince the Japanese people who no longer want nuclear power that restarting these old reactors can be done cleanly and safely in earthquake fault zones and in coastlines at risk of tsunamis. Both Tokyo Electric and Japan's government are attempting to showcase the decommissioning and the dismantlement of Fukushima Daiichi site long before it's even feasible from a radiological contamination standpoint. What's the truth the Japanese people need to know? First, it's impossible to dismantle and to clean up the Fukushima Daiichi site in 30 years. From the Fukushima Daiichi site will continue to bleed into the Pacific Ocean for decades because the groundwater flow is unmitigated. Third, the radioactive waste in at least 250,000 dump truck loads will have to be dumped somewhere in Japan in a shielded and contained area to prevent radiological contamination of another area in Japan. Fourth, thousands of young people involved in the decommissioning, the demolition, and the dismantlement of the highly radioactive site would receive huge radiation exposures. Fifth, the cost of cleanup of the Fukushima Daiichi triple meltdown will approach $500 billion. And finally, there's no place in Japan or in the world to store the 3 melted cores once they're finally removed, if it's even possible to secure and remove them. This is a technological feat that no engineer in the world has ever envisioned, since the nuclear industry never believed such a catastrophe could or would occur.
Yeah, right.
I believe that the Japanese people would not approve the restart of Japan's old reactors if they were informed of how environmentally damaging, astronomically expensive, and how long the cleanup of the Fukushima Daiichi site.
Well, then wake them up.
It sees the Japanese government and the world's nuclear industries continuing their promotion of nuclear power, while Japan's press looks on silently due to the real threat and the constraints of the government's Secrecy Act forbidding discussions of such issues. The true human, financial, and environmental costs of this nuclear power catastrophe are not publicized and discussed. I'm Arnie Gunderson for Fairwinds Energy Education.
Well, he told it all, so. Alright, just said in the video. So, okay, y'all have a good one. Carol.